I'm working today on speaking from a different place, from here versus here. And I feel sufficiently terrified. So what I thought I would do, just to break the ice, is to throw down right off the bat in a way that feels very comfortable with me, completely physically exposing myself to you. This running through the streets of Kona almost naked feels quite easy. So, and actually a little additional personal disclosure on that. That was my 30-year-old ass. Not exactly the version that we're dealing with today. So for most of my 51 years, I've been moving forward literally. My mother would actually say that I dropped out of the womb and kind of took off. But she's also the same woman that told me that if I ran too much, that my uterus would fall out. I've raced and adventured in over 70 countries, uterus still intact. And what I consider mind-body exploration. And I believed that the enormity of what I learned, what I gained from all of these experiences was the best of me. And then something happened that ultimately opened me to a new connection to myself and others. I was required to stand still. And that's what I want to share with you today. So here's how this played out. In 2008, October, I was training for a 6-day running stage race in Antarctica. And about 6 weeks before I was scheduled to hop on an airplane, I found out that I had severely torn my Achilles tendon. This is a bad injury. This is like the mother lode of endurance sports injuries. And in my life, within my life, it was like slamming on the emergency brake while driving on the Autobahn. So I did what any self-respecting, hardcore endurance athlete would do. I went into a deep funk for about 2 weeks and grieving. And when I came out, finally in acceptance, I felt like I was standing at a crossroads, kind of like this guy in the Andes. Some of you have been there in your lives. Some of you have been there with life-threatening illnesses. Mine wasn't that, but I still asked the same questions you asked yourself. Who am I now? What can my life look like now? And for me, the bigger question was, can I possibly find any value or virtue in a place of standing still? So I did what you did. I started seeking. I started reading even more books. I went to seminars. I started sitting meditation. I considered therapy, but a good friend told me that I would most likely end up psychoanalyzing any therapist I came across, so that came off the table. I took a project off the shelf that had been patiently waiting for me to come to a place in my life when I was required to slow down. I wanted to go to Bhutan. Now, Bhutan, as some of you may know, is considered the last Shangri-La, an oasis in an otherwise frenzied and fast-paced world. Bhutan governs by a document called Gross National Happiness. I wanted to go to Bhutan, and I wanted to cross the entire country in a non-motorized fashion, and I wanted to do a cultural immersion of the country. So what ensued over the next couple years was an enormous project with a lot of moving parts that became Expedition Bhutan. In short, 4-person expedition team went with a 4-person film team. We covered 500 remote miles in this stunning, pristine country. And we immersed ourselves in the question, what matters to the happiest people on Earth? We shot a documentary film called The Happiest Place that will come out next year. The expedition was wildly successful. We came back, felt an enormous sense of satisfaction. I wouldn't have changed a thing, but I came home and I felt empty. I felt sad. As the expedition leader, I was required to stay in my head, make decisions, stay on my game, keep the expedition moving forward. And I hadn't allowed myself to really just stand in one place and feel what these people could offer, the seeking that I was doing in my life. And I had a feeling there was a huge piece of the puzzle there for me. So what I did then is I decided to go back. Now, this seems completely insane after already being there for 2 months. So I bought a plane ticket. And I decided that I was going to live in one place, standing still, in Bhutan, in the capital, and I was going to volunteer with the Bhutan Olympic Committee, who was the gracious supporter of our expedition. I would run my business from halfway around the world, and I would just stay in one place and see what showed up for me. What happened then, really quickly after I arrived in Bhutan, was so simple and complete. And the good news is that it didn't necessarily involve 2 months of sitting in a cave doing sitting meditation. So I was quite pleased with that. But here's how it showed up for me. So I'd like you to consider that in our fast-paced, frenzied lives, that we are all endurance athletes. We make lists, we create goals, we get up each morning and we strive toward our objectives. Things happen along the way that try and derail us from hitting our target every day. We either let them bother us or we shove them out of the way and we just sort of keep moving forward. Some days it feels easy and flowy, and some days we feel like crap, but we just keep going forward anyway. We derive an enormous amount of skill, value from this life. We actually generate virtue from this type of existence. We get really good at it. And I like to consider this as our sort of A-list of what we can either take away from or bring to our fast-paced lives. So this is an optimistic view of it. We can become a risk seeker to broad and expand who we are. We create a never say never drive and a work ethic that keeps us pushing on. But what happens in this existence, in this fast-paced world, just like in being an endurance athlete, we're required to stay in our heads, stay focused, keep your eye on the ball. We're required to stay self-focused. The Bhutanese have an A-list as well, things that they bring to their lives every day that drives them forward from their belief system. Their list looks quite a bit different than ours. Partly because the pace of their life is slower, mostly because they're Buddhist, but really the deep reason is because the Bhutanese drive their lives each day from their hearts. So when I arrived in Bhutan, I was working with the Bhutan Olympic Committee, and I had brought all this immense power, this value and virtue that I had gained from this fast-paced moving life. And I was surrounded by people who come from a place of compassion, who accept all beings and situations, who have a calm demeanor. They're the most gracious folks that I've ever met. And if you go to Bhutan and look for a job, the thing that your potential employer is going to look for, top of the list, is how humble you are. This is what I was surrounded by. And what I found myself is I was driving my immense Western power, the skills that I had learned from my fast-paced life, from my heart. This felt incredibly new, and what it ultimately opened for me was a deep sense of connection. The connection started with me, a connection to myself, and here's how it looked when I was in Bhutan. I would take off to shoot pictures, and I felt an intimacy that I had never felt before with the objects or the people that I was shooting. Friends were telling me from back home that the writing on my blog, the sharing that I was doing about my trip, had a different texture to it, that it felt more like it was coming from a heart space rather than my head. I started to see my clients through a different frame, a softer lens, a more compassionate place. And what I noticed from that was that my interactions with them, my communication skills sharpened and heightened. I felt like I had more space in my brain, not from meditation, but from being open to driving from this new place of the heart. I felt more myself than I'd ever felt in my life. The other thing that happened was it started to show up from my interactions with the Bhutanese. And this was one of the most dramatically powerful. I had several meetings with His Royal Highness the Prince, who's the president of the Bhutan Olympic Committee, before I left the country. In one of our meetings, he said to me, "You've come to Bhutan as a professional with enormous passion and an enormous amount of love for my country. And with those values, with those gifts, you're watering the seeds of a developing nation. Imagine the connection there. Imagine the connection. On the eve of my leaving the country, he then said to me, America is a long distance from Bhutan, but I will always consider you a close neighbor, and you're welcome in my country not as a guest, but as a member of my family. Imagine the connection. I'd like you to imagine the connection in our world, in our community, if every day we woke up and we took our powerful, amazing, passionate, creative selves, our hardworking selves out into the world, and we drove that immense power from a place of the heart. Imagine the connection, not just with our loved ones, but with people in the workplace. Imagine if we came from a place of acceptance and compassion in the work. Imagine the connection with strangers. If every interaction we had with someone that we didn't know on a daily basis came from a place of the heart, a moment in time when we allowed for a connection with that person. Here's how that looks in Bhutan. When you hand a Bhutanese an object, a gift, food, maybe money to buy a beer, they put their hands together and they open their palms to you and they bow slightly. And they look at you just for an instant as if to say, I'd like to acknowledge this moment with you. Imagine the connection in our community. Imagine the marriage of our high-powered Western world with the compassion of the East coming together in our community on a regular basis. Thank you.